Welcome to Lesson 2 of Module 5 Heredity. In this video, we're going to be looking at reproduction in mammals, and we're looking specifically here at how the features of fertilization, implementation, hormonal control work together in pregnancy and birth in mammals. The fertilization, just recapping from last video, is the fusion of two haploid gametes, and they form a single diploid zygote cell. This cell contains the genetic material of both the egg and the sperm, and there are equal genetic contributions from both the male and the female. And the sperm cells, in fact, move in one direction towards the egg to fertilize it. We can see both of those processes happening on the right-hand side in the image there. So the steps of fertilization, there are 4 steps. So the sperm uses enzymes from the acrosome to dissolve and penetrate the protective layer surrounding the egg. On reaching the cell membrane, the molecules on the sperm surface bind to receptors on the egg cell membrane, and it means that the egg can check whether the sperm is of the same species, can fertilize the egg, and then we see the nucleus of the sperm enter the cytoplasm in the egg cell. Changes at the surface of the egg occur to prevent the entry of multiple sperm nuclei into the egg, and then we see the fusion of haploid egg and sperm nuclei, resulting in a diploid zygote cell, which we then refer to as the fertilized egg. Implantation is the process in which the zygote travels down the oviduct until it reaches the uterus, and has to undergo a number of developmental stages to allow it to then move on to the next phase of becoming a fetus. So the first stage is cleavage, and we see rapid cell proliferation, and a single-celled zygote divides into many hundreds of smaller cells via mitosis. This mitosis transitions the cell to a morula, and this is a ball of unspecialized embryonic stem cells. Continuing the mitosis, this morula becomes a blastocyst as its cells begin to differentiate, and the inner cell mass will give rise to the embryo, and the outer layer of the cells will develop the placenta. And then after this implants into the uterus, gastrulation occurs to form a gastrula, which eventually becomes a fetus. And we have this in a diagram here as we move through. So it looks like a long process, but this does in fact happen within a period of 9 days, as we see here in the diagram. And this implantation is where we see the zygote, which we now refer to as the blastocyst, actually attaches itself to the wall of the uterus. So without this implantation, it doesn't allow the placenta to form, which we know is really important in giving nutrients and gases to the developing fetus, and it also allows any nutrients, gases, and waste to be exchanged between the maternal blood. So here we can see in the image this implantation. So the blastocyst actually adheres itself to the uterus wall. So in terms of development of the embryo, we went through in those steps. We heard a few words in terms of the way the cell develops over time, and we can see that in a diagram down the bottom. We see the fertilized egg, the morula, the blastocyst, the gastrula developing into the embryo and the fetus. But in fact, we see this embryo having 3 layers, which are really important in forming the structures required for the fetus to then be able to grow and develop into a living, functioning organism. So we see the ectoderm, which is in fact the outermost. Oh, they're both in the inside here, but we see the ectoderm in this layer here, and that layer of cells is important for forming the epidermis, hair, brain, and spinal cord cells. We then see the mesoderm, which is our pink layer of cells here, and these cells differentiate to form muscle, cartilage, kidney, and gonad cells. And then we have our endoderm, which is obviously further in here, and these cells are responsible for forming the lungs, the bladder, and the lining of the digestive system. We do in fact have to talk about how IVF works, as it does mimic the process that would occur naturally that we've just been through. So we do in fact see this 6-step process, and rather than the egg and the sperm being able to fertilize naturally within the body, within the uterus of a female, we do actually have to see this embryo develop outside of the body before it is transferred into the uterus via a cannula. And we can see that in step 6. So we do need to have the sperm still penetrating the egg cell, developing the embryo. And once that embryo is developed, we can then try and implant that into the uterus. So the last process, which is the pregnancy and the birthing of the fetus, it does in fact occur after that fetus has developed into the right size and having all the cells and tissues that are specialized. But whilever it's continued to develop, it's within the amniotic cavity, which provides it with some protection. In humans, we have our pregnancy length divided into 3 trimesters, and we monitor this using ultrasound technology. But we can see on the right that there is a varying period of gestation based on the animal, and we can see pretty unlucky to be an elephant, 21 months the female is pregnant before she does in fact give birth. So for pregnancy, successful pregnancy, successful birth to actually occur, there is a large amount of hormonal control that actually is responsible for allowing these processes to be successful. And there are signaling molecules that are responsible for communicating between the organs and the tissues. And we can see 2 on the right here. We see estrogen, which is quite important in the ovary glands. Well, that's where that's produced, but it is responsible for controlling the thickness of the womb, but also sending signals to the pituitary gland, which is in our brain. It produces this follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and the LH, and these are responsible for controlling when eggs are produced and released. And the contraceptive pill is in fact responsible for mimicking the processes here, but also changing to produce different hormones which are responsible for preventing monthly ovulation and then in fact pregnancy. So here we have a list of all the different hormones that have to work together for a female to fall pregnant, but also then to carry the fetus to term. And we're going to look at these in more detail in our lessons. So these hormones are really important for pregnancy and the labor process. And it's really important because we need to have a signal that allows the uterus to contract and allowing the cervix to increase in size, and actually beginning the labor process when gestation is complete. So we see that 2 of the main hormones that we've talked about in this process are oxytocin, as it talks about creating those contractions, but also responsible for allowing the mother to release all of the placenta, and then helping to stimulate lactation with prolactin. So it does then become a signaling molecule. That concludes lesson 2 of module 5. Make sure you tune in for lesson 3.